Olu, you want to start us out?
Sure. All right, so my name is Olu, and I'm going to be the moderator of this meeting. If you have any questions or feedback or comments during the presentations, just leave it in the chat box, and then we can address them later when it's time for that. If you have anything else that you want to address, you can just send me a direct message in the chat box, so I can send it to Dr. Weaver or one of the other presenters. I think that's pretty much it. I'm going to take a couple screenshots of the meeting. I hope you all don't mind that, but
So we should all smile. Look at us. All right. Look, there's Rick.
yeah.
There you go. Well, thank you, Olu. Thank you for moderating. This section will probably have some people drifting on as we continue. I'm Dr. Joanna Weaver. I'm from Bowling Green State University. I am an associate professor as well as the adolescent young adult program coordinator and integrated language arts content coordinator. Brooke or Chloe, would you like to introduce yourselves?
Sure, I'll go first. My name is Chloe Beeker. I am actually Dr. Weaver's graduate assistant right now. I'm getting my master's in reading. And I actually just graduated last April with my bachelor's in AYA-ILA, so integrated language arts. I did student teaching in 10th grade. But yeah, nice to meet everybody.
Okay, hi everyone. My name is Brooke Casperson, and the same as Chloe, I graduated last spring in AYA-ILA, and I'm getting my master's in reading. And right now I am working part-time teaching high school English with freshmen and seniors, all while being a graduate assistant and taking all my graduate classes.
Mind-blowing. But you'll be able to relate to Kate a lot, who is also teaching the sweet freshman. And I want you all to know, and I'm going to share my screen, but I want you to feel free to ask questions throughout the we want it to be very conversational versus just talking at you. And so we want you to participate as much as possible. When we're asking questions and stuff, you can shout out your answers. You can put answers in the chat. We just want you to be totally engaged with our presentation. And as you think of yourself in your classroom and how you can engage students in social justice and reflect on that, how to effectively reflect on that through your teaching. We just want you to ask questions as we go, but I am going to hopefully share my screen effectively. That is always the goal. We will see how well this turns out for us. Hold on a moment. Here we go. Can everyone see my screen? All right, let me now put it in presenter mode because that's always fun. I don't know, it's just doing all sorts of fun things. All right, so our objectives for today, I could go back one and say, welcome to the Winter Conference from Project Impact 2023. I am actually one of the co-directors of the Project Impact grant. So I've had an opportunity to work with a lot of partnering schools and teachers around the community. We also serve, obviously, our pre-service teachers, in-service teachers, and community with our Project Impact grant. And so we're going to be talking about reflection through SOAP notes, and hopefully you're in the right place, students' connections with social justice. Our objectives for today are, first of all, what is social justice? What are SOAP notes? And how do the two connect with one another? And then what we want to be able to do at the end is talk about what does this integration, this connection, what does it look like for you in your content area? Could you all put, and I know we know Kate's is social studies, would you, and Rick's is curriculum and teaching and early childhood, would you put in the chat what your content areas are? That just will help us know who our audience is. We know we've got TPS teachers, TSA teachers. What else? Who else are you? Just so that helps us inform us. Let's see. We've got American history. We've got early childhood, TPS, 7th grade social studies. Adam, that's awesome. So we've got a biology. This is fantastic. And we're ILA. So we're kind of covering, I don't think we have a math person, do we? The only one we're missing is kind of math or CTWE, which is the career tech. But this is excellent. This will be really fun to have this conversation. So I'm going to turn this over. Brooke, are you going to talk with us about social justice and what it is?
Yes, I am. So we're going to first start off with what is social justice. So if anyone would like to unmute and talk about what social justice is to them or type it in the chat, feel free to do so right now.
What do you think? What is social justice when you think about it? What does that mean to you? Any ideas?
Community involvement.
Excellent. Community involvement. What else?
I'll take a stab at it. I think it's making sure that that resources are distributed equitably, so that no one's hungry, no one is homeless, people have equal education, all those kinds of things.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Renee typed in the chat, contributing to the creation of a fair community. And then Adam also said social justice is making sure everyone is given a chance regardless of where you come from. Yes, those are all great definitions, but we can go to the next slide. And this is what...
Sorry. Oh my gosh. I gotta stop touching it. Someone else should be in charge.
This is what we said social justice is, and it's justice in terms of the distribution of wealth, opportunities, and privileges within a society, dignity, respect, humanity, in every person. Renee also said, and acknowledgement of unfair practices as well, and doing something about it. Yes, that is exactly right. So then we have some quotes about why social justice research is important. The first one states that educators are responsible for creating meaningful change. Social justice is a mindset. You can learn to implement it, not recite it for a test. And the second quote states, a social justice classroom is one that is critical in nature. Thus, we should be constantly encouraging students to question the world around them as well as the schools they attend.
I think that's huge. That quote from the from Bell 2019, because it really puts the focus on the students and how are we making our students aware of the world around them and connecting with the world around them and having that empathy and understanding what social justice truly means and how that impacts them. I just think that's a really cool quote. Yes, we are responsible for creating this change in our classroom, but how do we help our students and support our students and being aware of the social justice issues around them? I think that's really cool.
I'm going to date myself a little bit here, but back in the 60s, it was question authority. And this is really what the same thing is, I think.
So explain that more, Rick. What do you mean?
You question why things are the way they are. Why is the world so screwed up? Why aren't people being fed? It's all social justice issues. So why is it the way it is?
And I think it's so important, that we look at history. When you said you were going to date yourself, but look at those historical documents, look at the literature, look at the way things were done. And it was kind of a sign of disrespect back then if you dared to question authority. And now we're saying, you know what, they need to not question it, not necessarily, obviously not disrespectfully questioning authority, but questioning the world around them. And being able to connect with the world and saying, this isn't right. So I love that you said that. And you were willing to date yourself, Rick, because that means you're dating me too. Well, not, okay. We're going to move on because that was worded very strange. So yes, I love that we need to look at our history and how it occurs in our history and how that impacts us. I really apologize on the way this is moving. Every time my fingers move, it flips. It's very odd.
Okay, so that kind of leads in perfectly to our next question, reflecting on what might have happened in the past, and then needing to reflect on our own teaching to really teach social justice students effectively to our students. So how do we know we are teaching social justice issues effectively? How do you reflect on the effectiveness of your teaching? So again, if you want to take a second to unmute and discuss, or put something in the chat, that would be great if you want to put your thoughts out there.
So the question is, how do we reflect on our own classroom effectiveness when we're trying to engage our students in social justice? How do we know if we're doing it well? Is that the question?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, how do we know we are teaching social justice issues effectively to our students?
And that they're engaging in it, right?
Right.
That's hard.
Adam said, on how many times I have to ask students to listen.
I think thinking about social justice requires uncomfortableness. Somebody's got privilege and that can make them feel uncomfortable, and somebody doesn't have privileges, and pointing that out makes them uncomfortable.
Yeah, that's so true. And then putting yourself in a vulnerable position to discuss that uncomfortableness. And then Renee said, constantly checking in with myself, am I reaching all students in ways they can digest the material? So yeah, reflecting on yourself, your own teaching. Am I approaching this the right way? Could I do this better? What's working? What do I need to research or do more to help and reach my students? And allowing students to discuss things they bring up, even if I sort of relate my topic or feel uncomfortable. Yeah. Allowing your students that creating a safe space. I'm sorry, I wasn't sure what you were saying. Even if it is not a topic you feel comfortable talking about. Yeah, creating a safe space for your students to discuss is so important, especially with these social justice issues. So thank you for putting some of your thoughts in the chat.
This is scary when you think about the world today and what we're allowed to say, and pushback from parents and pushback from around us. So we really need to think about this, because we are putting ourselves in a vulnerable position. We're putting our students in a vulnerable position. And we need to create that, like everyone was saying, we've got to create a safe space. We've got to create, some group norms that allow for this conversation, kind of the non-judgmental conversation. I love these responses because this is really powerful stuff. So I appreciate all of this. Here we go. Whoops. Oh, look at me go.
Okay. So then a framework we are suggesting to use to help you reflect on these issues in your teaching is SOAP notes. So a framework used to organize records and thinking. And in SOAP notes, we have the S, so thinking about subjective. Your students' body language, are they willing to participate?
Oh my gosh, I am so sorry. This is flipping everywhere.
What is going on?
I know, it's like, wow.
So yes, the S is the subjective. Are your students willing to participate? The body language. Are they having their hands on their chins? Are they leaning down? Are they openly engaged? What do you notice about that? Their attitudes. And then going on to the O, observation of students. And there's an anecdotal note. So what did your students take away from the lesson? Did they mention that they liked or did not like the lesson? Are you noticing any patterns starting to emerge? And then you go on to assessing. So after you reflect on the students and their thoughts and how they really perceive the lesson, then you think about how did you assess the students, their learning, their progress monitoring, any running records you have to really look at that evidence of student learning. So how did you assess the students? What formative or assessments did you use? Was it a summative assessment? Was it more informal, maybe like an exit ticket or something like that? How will you use this data to plan lessons in the future? And then that goes right into the P, planning for the next lesson. So based on what you saw in your lesson, how will you adjust that, or what will you keep the same for your next lesson? So planning, what will you do for your next lesson and why? Is there a reference for SOAP notes?
We will make sure that's available so that you have a template for those SOAP notes. Absolutely. Is that what you're asking for, like a template? Okay, absolutely, we will do that.
Yes. So P, again, looking into the planning, what you will do in the next lesson. And then there's two other sections. The one is challenges. So what challenges did you encounter while working with your students? Where did they struggle? Why did they struggle in this area? And then further learning really ties into the challenges. What do you need to do to really help your students, help yourself as a teacher, instruct those students and really get them to engage and connect with these social justice issues that you are teaching and discussing?
This is huge when I'm thinking about this. And I've published several different journal articles on the use of SOAP notes with pre-service teachers. And I use this with my pre-service teachers. I know some other content areas, social studies and early, that freshman, sophomore, undergraduate years, we're using the SOAP notes to help them begin reflecting on the teaching, real intentional reflection. I've also, I have a book that is written by 17 different in-service teachers. They all took a different chapter, and it's under review right now. And they took 3 weeks using the SOAP notes and the intentionality of reflective practice. And these SOAP notes really have you unpack, where is the mindset of your students? What are you observing in their engagement during the class? How are you assessing them when you think about social justice? It could be anything, though, that you're covering in class. It doesn't just have to be social justice. It could be any topic or any day that you're teaching, where you're just like, are they understanding the concept? How do I know that they are understanding? Like, what am I observing to show me that they're engaged and they're actively learning with me? Because that really does, just as Chloe was saying, that reflection really frames out tomorrow's lesson. Like, what do I need to reteach, revisit? What do I need to drill down and unpack further to really help our students make those connections to whatever that concept is? What were my challenges, instructional challenges, teaching this? What else do I need to learn? So this is a really powerful piece when we think about organizing our reflection, our intentional reflections. So thank you, Chloe. That was awesome. Oh,
Yeah,
my goodness. There you go.
So thinking about the purpose of SOAP notes, as Dr. Weaver touched on, and as I touched on a little bit in the previous slide, SOAP notes really help you reflect on student learning, and then also the teacher's side, your instruction. So SOAP notes help you compile relevant information about how your students are engaging and attending to the lesson objectives. Are they meeting your learning function? Are they reaching that lesson objective, that goal? Identifies instructional and learning obstacles. Again, those challenges. Where did my students struggle? What do I need to do to improve my lesson? Or help them really understand, do I need to reteach anything, go back because I saw that they weren't grasping this certain concept. And then it provides a structure for developing your plans to assist students in achieving their goals. Again, that planning, what do I need to do to help my students in the future? Okay, so now we will look into examples of what Brooke and I did in our student teaching experiences. How did we engage our students in social justice? And I think Brooke, you're up first with the.
Yeah, so a little bit of background of my students during student teaching. So I was in a 7th grade classroom, and this school that I was at was kind of low income in an urban school district. So we never particularly had a social justice unit specifically. So we did an ongoing discussion throughout the year. So the first thing we did was talk about what is social justice, what is a specific definition of social justice, and what social justice means to my students. They were also able to choose the topics they wanted to talk about. So during our first mini lesson, they did some research, and the students chose to talk about education inequality, immigrant justice, and then obviously COVID-19, the social crisis and justice challenge. Not one of my students were the same, a lot of different backgrounds. So this was very, very important in my classroom. So the first thing my students did was read an article from Learning for Justice. And as you can see, my SOAP notes are kind of long, but when you do your reflection, you can write them, type them, use bullet points, short little reflections that will help you in the future. They don't have to specifically look like this. I did this for class. That's why they're in complete sentences and look very long. But the S in subjective. So I obviously wanted to take the time to read an article about social justice, because social justice is not something that is talked a lot about in the 7th grade. So we were doing an author's purpose lesson. So I thought it would be a great time to bring it up and have a discussion about why the author is writing the article on social justice. So like I said before, we looked at an article from Learning for Justice, and I gave the students the opportunity to talk about what the author's intent of the article was, which was to inform, as well as what they know about social justice. When I was walking around the room, I heard students bring up social justice issues such as racial inequality, gun violence, the income gap, climate justice, and many more issues. And then while I was walking around the room, in my head, I was like, I had no idea the 7th graders would even know about these different issues. So I thought it was a great turning point of what I could potentially do with future lessons. Because of this discussion, I wanted to hear what else students had to say. So like I said, this unit is about author's purpose. So each day, the discussion of social justice will carry on about the different issues. With the ongoing discussion, the students were only dipping their toes in to begin, but this was a great start to get them to think about what is going on in the world they are living in. We can go to the next slide. Okay. So during one of our other discussions, we talked about immigrant justice, and we read the poem Casey at the Bat. So you're probably wondering how a poem about baseball deals with social justice issues, but I wanted to give the students some background information about the time period this was written in. It was written in the 1880s, and during this time, there were many social justice issues going on. So I told the students about how in the 1880s, almost 40% of townships in the United States lost population because of migration. There was noise, traffic jams, slums, air pollution. The sanitation was really bad, and there were many health problems within people. Communities were often centered around neighborhoods, particularly for immigrant populations. So during this discussion, it led students to talk about social justice issues on immigration before we even read the poem. So I thought learning about the time period was just a great piece of learning about social justice throughout history and what happened then and what is still happening now.
Okay, so then going into my example, I was in a 10th grade classroom, English language arts classroom, and it was a rather rural school. But to give you some background about this unit, so I taught a rhetoric and speech unit prior to Martin Luther King Jr.'s I Have a Dream. This was our last speech in the unit. Before this, we read and annotated and analyzed Ain't I a Woman by Sojourner Truth. And then we also looked at the Gettysburg Address. So very chronologically, they linked up very nicely. And then we looked at I Have a Dream. So I gave my students some background to Martin Luther King Jr. and the Civil Rights Movement. We watched some videos, did some viewing guides, and then reviewed some key rhetorical devices. So we really looked at things like similes, metaphors, repetition, including anaphora, how Martin Luther King Jr. used allusion to even reference Abraham Lincoln. So it linked very well. Then we actually read the speech, annotated, looking at those rhetorical devices that I just listed. And the big question was, how did Martin Luther King Jr. use rhetoric to advance his purpose? We really looked at the language he used to analyze what was his purpose in writing this speech and looking at the social justice issue of racial inequality. And then we did some shared class notes where we, again, really looked at those key rhetorical devices. I had my students work in groups, they identified them, and then they analyzed them, thinking about what he did and why he did it, how he did it. And looking at my SOAP notes. So these are my SOAP notes for the class period that my students watched and annotated I Have a Dream. And thinking back, I believe it was a shortened class period, which worked out perfectly because the speech is about 20 minutes long. So I had the video of Martin Luther King Jr. and my students annotated, I annotated along with them. And it was really cool noticing my students looking at the subjective. I saw that my students were really engaged. They were diligently annotating their text. And I think it was a very influential and powerful video for them to see. Just Martin Luther King Jr.'s powerful voice as he's making this speech and who they saw in the audience as well. And then observation. So annotating was a way for my students to freely express their voices, thoughts, and any questions they had related to rhetoric and how that impacts the message of equal rights and social justice related to race. And it also was a link to a visual connection to what they saw in the Black Lives Matter movement in the summer of 2020, when that was very, very big in our country. And then looking at analyzing the I Have a Dream speech and those shared class notes, I talked about how in the subjective, I saw a lot of my students participate because again, they were working in small groups, so they could feel more comfortable talking with their classmates. And I heard a lot of different voices as I walked around the classroom, thinking about how he used figurative language and rhetorical devices to express his experience and others with racial injustice. And then my students I used the annotations in the shared class notes as my assessment. I saw that my students were able to critically read the text and make annotations related to rhetoric and how, again, he used the language to express racism and the hardships faced by people of color in the United States. And there were so many good conversations in the class. And I loved using the shared class notes. It was just a big Google document, even though it was kind of crazy sometimes having all the students work on one Google document. I really liked how they could see each other work. The students they might have been struggling, they could look at another group and see, oh, okay, they're doing this. Maybe that's the direction we can go in. And they could see working examples. So I really liked using that tool, that technology tool, to help this lesson.
We are now going to move on, and how did we include the voices of the students we serve in the conversation of social justice, and what is an effective tool we can use to reflect on student engagement with issues of social justice? So as teachers, we want to create a safe, inclusive, and welcoming environment for every student, especially when we are talking about these hard topics. So our second discussion involved education and inequality. Once again, we were doing a big unit on author's purpose. So we did read another article together as a class about inequality and how education is the one key that rules them all. And we also, the students did a free write and they discussed stopping inequality in the classroom. Before our discussion, I allowed students to write down what they felt about the article. And then when I was walking around the room, the students were actively writing. No student was like just looking around the room, looking off and like a blank space, daydreaming. Every single student was like quickly writing because they all seemed to have an opinion on this. In their writings, I took 3 students' quotes from their writings and I put it in here. One student said the first step in bringing about change is to recognize the need for changes and then be willing to do what is necessary. Student number 2 stated that we need to bring parents on board to help with this issue. And student number 3 stated we need to support teachers better financially and invest in more resources for support in low-income underfunded schools. I think number 3 stuck out to me the most because especially in the school that I was at, they were underfunded in some ways. Some students had Chromebooks that they could use in school, just better financially, like supporting the students with the resources that they had. And then realizing that some of these students don't have these resources at home. We can go to the next slide. So looking at my SOAP notes, once again, the observation, like I said, the students were actively writing about the article that they read about education inequality. And then after about 3 minutes, I made sure to tell students that this was a safe space to talk and no one would be judged for their opinion if they wanted to share what they wrote. The first question I asked was, what was your reaction to the article? Some students said it was sad to hear about, while others were angry that education inequality is going on in the world. Then I asked students what we could do to try and stop this inequality in the classroom. And so many students had an answer to this and wanted to raise their hand and share. And lastly, because we were dealing with author's purpose, I wanted to ask them what the author's intent of the article was, and the students agreed it was to inform us about what is going on in the education system and persuade us to do something to stop it. And then at the last activity that we did with this is the students had an exit slip and the students were going to look up their own article about education inequality, and they're going to write down 2 to 3 facts that they learned from that article, and then also once again write down what the author's purpose was and how they feel about the facts that they found. So during my lesson, I just really made sure the students had a safe space to share about these topics, especially with middle schoolers. It can be hard. I guess you would say some students feel judged when they share, or they're scared to share about what their classmates think because it's kind of all about like being cool, I guess, in middle school. So during my class period, I just made sure that everyone felt safe, and if they wanted to share, they could share. If they didn't have to. Some students just handed me their note cards and I read it out loud to the class, and it was anonymous. So just making sure our students' voices are heard, but making sure they feel safe while doing it.
Okay, and then looking into how did I empower my students with different backgrounds to engage in social justice, and how did I know it was working? So what I did with Martin Luther King Jr., and I Have a Dream, I provided my students with choices. That was how I empowered their voices, how I made sure all my student voices were being heard. I gave them a choice board assignment, so they could choose any one of these 5 ideas. One was Poster of Dreams, where they created a poster and really integrated their dreams with Martin Luther King Jr.'s dreams. An fictional interview with Martin Luther King Jr., or they could really take on the perspective of an audience member, looking at mood and tone, a timeline of Martin Luther King Jr.'s life, visualizing metaphors, so really illustrating those powerful metaphors that Martin Luther King Jr. has throughout his speech. And then I also said that they could create their own idea as long as it was approved by me. And then I have some on the next slide, some student work samples. So this is all of my students' work displayed in the hallway. And then on the next slides, I have it zoomed in. If we go to the next, whoa. Can you go to the previous one? Okay, so this was the poster of dreams assignment. This student, and for all of these, I also had to have a written rationale as well, explaining what they did and why they did it. So this student, you can see the rationale on the left side, and then the poster they created on the right side. This poster was amazing. This student really focused in on social justice issues, looking at I Dream, where we have a world where mental health is discussed, and she really talked about many issues that are just so important. And I could tell the student especially, really went deeper with this assignment. She really critically analyzed the world around her. And then if you go to the next one, these students also did a great job integrating or mixing their dreams with Martin Luther King Jr.'s dreams. And it was interesting to see the different kinds of dreams. Like one student was, I dream to go skydiving one day. So you can see the different levels of dreams that they had. But it was really cool. And I loved this, this choice. This assignment was really cool for them to express their creativity while also giving them a voice. And they also got to learn about each other, as we did a gallery walk too, which I'll talk about. But this was the visualizing metaphors assignment. So again, the student wrote their rationale about what metaphors they chose to do and how they visualized it with the chains of segregation, drinking from the cup of bitterness and hatred. So this was really cool to see how they visualized the metaphors and then explain them in the rationale. Okay, so then how I had my students present their work was we did a gallery walk. So each student placed their assignment or poster, whatever they created, on their desk, and then we walked around. And then I also had peer review sheets that they were filling out. So it was just a really great class period. Doing this gallery walk, students were very involved and positive and really enjoyed seeing what their peers created. And it was really nice to see that, especially through the low pressure of the gallery walk rather than a whole class presentation. I saw a lot of smiles, a lot of positive feedback throughout the class period. And I could just really tell my students were engaged and felt empowered, and they were proud of the work that they created. And then I think a choice board was the right way to go for my students. They were all of different backgrounds, they're each their own unique person. They got to express their thoughts about I Have a Dream in a way that best suits their learning style. It was amazing to see the creativity of my students, even the ones that were really quiet. It was really cool to see what they created, especially through that poster and all the other choices. And I think providing choices with your students and seeing what choice they pick really gives you insight into who they are as a person and as a learner. So it was really cool for me to see and use that to plan future units and lessons in the future, knowing my students a little more.
I'm coming. So, wow, those examples are really powerful. Using SOAP notes, I could see in my pre-service teachers, my student teachers, the impact of that reflection, that impact of writing about the student engagement and how what they were teaching was working or wasn't working. So when you look at this, we're obviously coming to the end of our presentation. What do you think about the use of SOAP notes, even on it doesn't have to be on a difficult topic, but I mean, we also have early childhood in here as well. What are you thinking when we look at this impact? It creates time for processing and reflection. It really carves out that time for you to intentionally reflect. It helps you to improve communication with yourself as well as with your students, because you're seeing what's working, what's not working, how you need to adapt and modify. It helps you to identify obstacles in your own instruction, as well as obstacles and challenges possibly in your student learning as you move forward, and therefore influencing the future instruction, both short-term and long-term. What do you think? You've all heard this. What are you thinking? What are your thoughts about reflection and instruction? Can you see this working in your class? Can you see the impact? What do you think?
I'll chime in here a little bit. So, with many kinds of assessments that we do, whether we're assessing students or we're assessing ourselves, we need to have time to do that during our instruction, right? So it works better if you're doing it while you're doing it rather than as a historical reflection. So it means that the way you're teaching has to be modified as well. It means it has to be active. Students have to be engaged in the learning process. So by forcing yourself to be engaged with taking SOAP notes, you're also being forced to engage in the types of instruction that are successful for students. So I like that.
Thank you. Right. Yeah, I really seen that change happen. And when we're doing it from such an early age, and we've had teachers actually at TSA who have created SOAP notes for their own students to self-reflect on their own learning in class. And they've used it as their own reflection on their learning. Like, what attitude did you have when you walked in today? Did you have breakfast? Did you, were you in a fight with a friend? It kind of seeing where their mindset is. So there's different levels and different ways to use them. So thank you. Somebody else.
I know I saw that earlier. Renee said in the chat, she thinks it would be a great tool for teachers to use if they are feeling stuck or in a rut, or frustrated with how their class is progressing. And then she also mentioned that it would be interesting to modify the SOAP notes to actually have students use it to reflect on their own experience in the lesson or class discussion. And I thought that was a really good point.
Absolutely. I love that. Anybody else? I'm going to stop sharing for a moment. We will make sure that you have the link. Obviously, you'll have the link to the presentations, but we definitely, Olu, if you can take the names down of those who are here, so we can also make sure we send the link to the SOAP notes so that they can have the template of the SOAP notes. That would be fantastic. Any other questions, comments, anything from today? What are your takeaways?
Well, my first takeaway is that BGSU does a great job of preparing students, because we have 2 graduate students who did a great job today. So thank you.
Yes, thank you. You are outstanding. Any other takeaways? Kate, Roseanne, Adam, Renee, anything when you think about your takeaways from today? Thanks, Renee. I see you in the chat there. Thank you so much. Well, listen.
I'm sorry. I was just going to say I've never used SOAP notes, but I know a teacher in my school does, and she really, swears by them. She said that they're wonderful. So I'm glad that I could sit in on this and get some ideas. So thank you for that.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Roseanne. And thank you, everyone. I think we're headed back to the main room now, correct? Is that correct, Olu?
Yes, I posted the link to the evaluation in the chats. If you could just copy and fill that out, that would be great. We're all headed back to the main room now.
Wonderful. So if you can do that evaluation, that would be fantastic. And we will see you back in the main room. See you, everyone. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.